Good evening, Bahamas. Coming up tonight on our news.
The Deputy Prime Minister accuses the former administration of hiring hundreds of workers before the last general election and spending like drunken sailors. That story straight ahead.
The Health Minister says the previous government balled out on NHI consultancy fees. The story coming up.
The Minister of National Security addresses the National Intelligence Agency. That's coming up tonight on our news.
Well, Stellar Energy Limited has left the bid on the table for this new administration to pick up. We've got the details coming up.
Our news is brought to you by Alive, the nation's newest and best LTE network.
Good to be alive.
Welcome to our news and thanks for joining us. I'm Christina McNeil. Topping news tonight, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance Peter Turnquest making several revelations while leading debate on the 2017-2018 budget in the House of Assembly this morning. Turnquest laying out a more detailed account of what he called the former government's penchant to spend like drunken sailors. Turnquest also claiming there were multi-million-dollar contracts signed and hundreds hired days before the PLP was booted out of office. Jasmine Brown reports.
Turnquest told his fellow parliamentarians that there were hundreds of hires and millions of dollars worth of contracts signed prior to the May 10th general election.
It is interesting, and I'm sure at some point we will talk about it. The commitments and contracts that were signed between the 8th and the 9th of May.
Then there were the hundreds of people he says were hired just before the general election. 41 of those people, according to Turnquest, were residents of Acklands. Leader of opposition business in the House, Glenys Hannah Martin, asked if this government would be firing civil servants as part of its efforts to cut costs. Well, that exchange led to Turnquest revealing more about all those people who were hired one day before the general election.
This way. I'm not going to say that.
No, don't answer.
What I'm going to say is that we will not place on the backs of the Bahamian people cost that they cannot bear for political expediency.
I was just asking a question from my seat because it's a question people want an answer to. And it is, as you go through this brush back and forth, cutting your cloth, is it likely to involve termination of people in the public service? That's what I was asking. You've answered it differently. You're saying, you said something that was much more aggressive in a response. I'm just wondering whether people are facing loss of revenue or income as a result of this exercise. That's the only question I was asking.
Persons were hired just before the election, May 10th. In fact, May 9th. People were hired by the previous administration. Hundreds of them. In Acklands today, it's 41 people, Mr. Speaker, in Acklands, who are calling, trying to find out how they're going to get paid and when they're going to get paid.
In highlighting the spending habits of the former government, Turnquest says the last Christie administration spent $20 million on consultancy fees for just one firm. Turnquest says the former administration has a lot of explaining to do.
Because when they look back at the 8th and the 9th, they will have to explain to the Bahamian people how they entered those contracts and why they entered those contracts for works as well as for services and employment and extension of contracts for people who are on contracts, who naturally should have ended. They're going to have to explain that.
Turnquest says the Minister administration will spend the next few months conducting an in-depth review of the government expenditure, which includes forensic audits, which are currently underway. Reporting for our news, I'm Jasmine Brown.
And the government of the Bahamas will be spending $79 million more on subventions in the 2017-2018 fiscal year. Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance Peter Turnquest also revealing that fact during his contribution in the House today. According to Turnquest, there are 25 entities that rely on subventions from the government. And for the upcoming fiscal year, that financial support will amount to $429 million. Here's the reason for the sharp increase in the recent rollout of NHI, according to Turnquest.
This is the disastrous path that we've been on, Mr. Speaker, will we put in place these brilliant, bright programs and create all of this goodwill and good feeling? Oh yeah, the government's taking care of us. But we don't bother to work out the details. How are you going to pay for it? Is there a better way? Can we somehow wring out more effective services out of the system that we have?
According to Turnquest, the largest subvention is earmarked for the Public Hospitals Authority, which will receive $213.8 million. Next on the list is the new National Health Insurance Authority with $48 million, the University of the Bahamas with $34.5 million, and rounding out the top four is the Water and Sewage Corporation with a $30 million subvention. Turnquest also revealing that the new Bahamas Civil Aviation Authority will get a subvention of $17.1 million, while Bahamas Air will get $14.9 million. Turnquest says the hundreds of millions of dollars spent on subventions will no doubt have an impact on the country's financial state.
As can readily be appreciated, these subsidies, investments, and lack of return or dividends have a substantial impact on the government's fiscal resources. Given the need for prudence and restraint in the period ahead, it will therefore be imperative that such subsidies, investments, and other support from these state-owned enterprises be reviewed and assessed objectively and equitably in line with other areas of direct government program activity.
And veteran attorney Code Smith has been sentenced to 14 days in prison for contempt of court. However, Supreme Court Justice Rhonda Bain says the sentence won't take effect unless Smith fails to pay a $20,000 fine by June 28th. The 52-year-old was found guilty of contempt of court in May over a series of scandalous affidavits filed in 2014 in support of a recusal application. In the offending affidavit, Smith suggested the judge was incapable of being fair and impartial toward him as a former PLP MP due to her alleged ties to the F&M. Smith eventually apologized for the affidavits more than 3 years after filing them. In her ruling, Bain doubted whether Smith was truly contrite given the length of time it took him to apologize. Some 20 members of Parliament from the last House sitting have 3 weeks to file their public disclosure or have their files and names turned over to the Attorney General, according to Press Secretary in the Office of the Prime Minister, Anthony Newbold. During his weekly press briefing, Newbold pointed out that 6 of those MPs did not file at all since they were elected in 2012.
And of course, you're talking about they could face a fine of $10,000 or 2 years imprisonment or both, or confiscation of land if land is involved.
According to Newbold, some of those MPs were re-elected and are currently sitting members of Parliament. According to the Public Disclosure Act, a summary of the declarations shall be published, and as Newbold mentioned, any person who does not comply with the law is liable to a fine not exceeding $10,000, imprisonment, or both. The Prime Minister's warning goes out to all those who sat in the last Parliament who did not disclose by March 1st of this year. According to Newbold, members of Parliament from both sides of the political divide were delinquent.
But about 6 of them didn't file at all from 2012 to 2017. And so, as I said, it's going to be an interesting next several weeks.
It turns out the previous Christie administration spent millions on consultancy fees alone for national health insurance. Health Minister Dr. Dwayne Sands says it's hard to tell why so much was spent on the plan, which he says still lacks key elements. Meanwhile, opposition leader Philip Davis says the new government needs to be more clear with its accusations of overspending. Kyle Joaquin reports.
The health minister says what the government is now in the process of doing is determining whether or not the country got the best value for the millions of dollars spent on foreign NHI consultants.
A lot of talk, a lot of waste. I mean, it's like we was balling, okay? We got money left, right, and center.
Sands said it's difficult to say whether the money the former government shelled out on national health insurance consultants was worth it. The amount consultants were paid on a monthly basis, he said, would shock you.
Up to tens of millions of dollars spent Some consultants getting up to $500,000 a month. Other consultants getting $250,000 per month. Non-Bahamian firms.
Up to $20 million was spent on consultancy. But the good news, according to Sands, is that government doesn't expect that figure to grow. He confirmed that at one point, KPMG was being paid $500,000 per month for consultancy. He said national health insurance has not only become an example of fiscal ineptitude and mismanagement, but the poster child for wastage under the previous government.
We are still looking at all of the numbers, and when I speak next week, Wednesday, we will give a full accounting to the Bahamian people. We will go through each of the consultancies entered into on behalf of the Bahamian people. We will give an accounting of all of the commitments made on behalf of the Bahamian people.
Dr. Sands said Bahamians have a right to know what commitments were made in their name. We also spoke with opposition leader Philip Davis, who didn't go into much detail when asked about the millions the previous government spent on consultants.
I don't want to speculate, because the last time I heard him speak about consultancy for NHI, I think he suggested it was $10 million and not 20.
What about the $500,000 for KPMG consultants?
What about that?
I mean, that's a high figure for consultants per month.
Per month? Well, I don't know. It depends on what that entails.
Davis also sought to clarify talks of the previous government spending $30 million on sidewalks. According to Davis, it was inaccurate information being spread by the media.
The $30 million he spoke of was for roadside contracts, he said, right, under the AGs of roads and parks. That had nothing to do with sidewalks. Sidewalks fall under the Ministry of Works, right, the Parks, Beaches and Parks Authority, which is an authority in and of itself.
Last week, Finance Minister Peter Turnquest revealed that the Ministry of Works overran its budget allocation by $75 million under Davis's watch. The sidewalk construction project was under the purview of that ministry. For our news, I'm Kyle Joaquin.
Well, the National Intelligence Agency has been shrouded in secrecy and controversy since it was introduced, even labeled a spy agency by the then opposition Free National Movement. Now the FNM has revealed plans to continue the NIA, expanding operations with a $90,000 budget. Giorgio Bain tells us more.
Now, while the Minister of National Security, Marvin Dame, says his ministry is still in the assessment phase of the National Intelligence Agency, he can promise that it will be robust and active. In 2014, then opposition leader Dr. Hubert Minnis demanded that the Christie administration shut down the NIA in the absence of a legal framework to govern the organization. Back then, Minnis insisted that the Free National Movement would not support what he called an illegal government program. The FNM has now revealed plans to move forward with the NIA. However, Dames could not say how the allotted $90,000 would be spent.
We're still in an assessment phase as it relates to national intelligence. But again, our government said that we will introduce legislation that will create the National Intelligence Agency. It's extremely important. Because I am a firm believer, and we are within our government, that if you build a very robust National Intelligence Agency, that can take us a long way in preventing many of the issues that we're facing on our streets today.
While in opposition, Minnis also asserted that concerns over crime should not be used by any government to create secret intelligence agencies with the potential of violating citizens' rights to privacy. When asked today if Bahamians should still be concerned about the NIA being a spy agency, Dames replied, only those who have something to hide.
Our focus is on anything that impacts on that threatens our nation. And so that's anything from terrorism to illegal smuggling, alien smuggling, drug smuggling, to illicit trafficking and firearms. So that's the focus of any agency. We're focusing on crime and corruption. You know, we're not here to spy on our citizens. That's not what we're all about, unless our citizens are engaged in acts that threatens our nation, then that's another story.
The National Security Minister's comments come on the heels of 4 murders in 4 days. Dame says he is extremely concerned about the threat of crime, as all Bahamians should be, but added that it's not a police responsibility.
I spent some time looking over the statistics for this year, looking critically at where these incidents are occurring, time of day, day of week, and getting an understanding from the commissioner and his team as to their role and ensuring that we do more to reduce the level of crime. Now, you'll hear everyone say it's not a police responsibility.
Reporting for our News, I'm Giorgio Bain.
Still to come on our News, Stellar Waste weighs in on the recently released PAHO report, plus the DPM defends government borrowing. That's coming up when our News returns.